Cremona, a city in northern Italy, bathes in the glories of its past. Since the Romans settled here more than 2,000 years ago, Cremona has nestled comfortably in the Po Valley. Between the 14th and the 16th centuries, this place became a cradle for art and craft. Creativity in painting, engraving, and music blossomed in the city. Together, these three art forms inspired Cremona's violin making, a world-class craft even today. 500 years ago, the instrument makers in Cremona might never have thought that their work could survive so many centuries. But today, their instruments still create the most beautiful music. These days, Cremona is recognized as the city of violins. In 2013, it opened the Violin Museum, which attracts some 100,000 visitors every year. The museum has 9 sections. From the French Queen Catherine de' Medici's court in the 16th century, it shows the origins and history of violin making. This room is like a real instrument workshop. Different tools and different parts of violins are on display, revealing the details of fine instrument making. With multimedia technology, this section illustrates the traditions of violin making in Cremona and introduces the famous violin making families of the city. The Treasure Box Room showcases a collection of antique instruments. Made in Cremona, they had traveled from country to country, from owner to owner, before they eventually came home. In 1539, Andrea Amati rented a house in central Cremona and opened his workshop. There he established the basic form of today's violin.
È uno dei pochissimi strumenti superstiti che Andrea Amati costruì per la corte di Carlo IX di Francia, quindi rappresenta questo strumento certamente le origini della liuteria a Cremona, ma possiamo ben dire che rappresenta le origini del violino per quanto riguarda non solo la realtà della nostra città.
After Andrea died, his 2 sons, Antonio and Girolamo, took over his workshop, but it was Andrea's grandson, Nicolò, who brought Amati violins to a peak. And with an increasing demand for the instruments, Nicolò began to train apprentices.
Famiglio vuol dire avere un giovane apprendista che vive all'interno della famiglia, quindi che condivide l'abitazione, condivide la tavola. Quindi Andrea Guarneri vive con la famiglia di Nicolò Amati. Andrea Guarneri è il primo liutaio della famiglia, il capostipite della famiglia Guarneri, che lascerà la bottega e la famiglia di Nicolò Amati per dare inizio alla dinastia dei Guarneri.
The Guarneri violins had incredible quality and became the first choice for many famous violin players, including Paganini. But the Guarneri family had a great competitor. For another apprentice of Niccolò's, Antonius Stradivari, created his own legend. Over 70 years of violin making, Antonio Stradivari produced more than 1,100 instruments. Most of his customers were royalty or aristocrats, so more than half of these instruments can still be found. 1700 to 1725 is generally considered as Stradivari's golden period. The instruments he made in this period are great examples of violin making.
Antonio Stradivari, 1715 il Cremonese, rappresenta uno dei migliori strumenti di Antonio Stradivari, costruito nel suo periodo creativo, che è considerato oggi la massima espressione del liutaio cremonese. Lo strumento in passato ha appartenuto al grande solista Joseph Joachim e attraverso alcuni passaggi di proprietà è giunto nel 1961 alla città di Cremona, però essendo il primo strumento di Stradivari che torna in città si è voluto chiamarlo il cremonese ed è lo strumento che poi nel corso della seconda metà del secolo scorso fino ad oggi è diventato il simbolo della città.
A Stradivari violin often has a smaller upper part and a bigger lower part. The curves in the middle are cut deeper. The soundboard is thick in the middle but thins out as it nears the edge. It has a penetrating voice with a strong bass. Stradivari's name has become a hallmark of violin making and a symbol of Cremona. In 2009, the Friends of Stradivari group was founded to gather together people who love Stradivari instruments.
So when we speak about Stradivari, we speak of the entire violin making history and tradition. The idea that started a few years ago, I would say 10 years ago, to create a community in the world that was interested and was loving the history of Cremona violin making and of course of Stradivari. So we started speaking with the collectors of instruments and say, well, if you have an instrument that you're not using or you don't know where to keep it, why don't you think of taking it to Cremona? We have a new museum, we have a know-how, we can take good care of your instruments and even make it better in a way, so we can make study, we can make publication about this. And this is very important for the public, but also for our violin makers in Cremona. As you know, we have more 150 workshops, but 250 makers, so they love to see new instruments, they learn through the instrument.
In the Violin Museum, the Friends of Stradivari room displays instruments loaned by organizations and collectors around the world. Some of these instruments are very rare. This one is called the Halia. Made in 1679, it is one of the very few inlaid Stradivari instruments.
The estimation that he built more than 1,100 instruments, but only 10 are inlaid. And most of them were made for the king. The 4 instruments are in the court of Spain, 4 instruments were made for the Medici. And this was, for some reason, unsold and stayed in the workshop of Stradivari after his death. And then through many passages, is now property of a collector in the United States, and is here in Cremona since more than 5 years. The Stradivari mandolin, this is the only one recognized as being made by Stradivari, but looking at the design that he made, he must have made other, and we are looking around the world to find this. And very interesting also the case, this original case made in the workshop of Stradivari. There are very few left, because at one point they were not considered important, so destroyed for the modern one, but this is a very a beautiful piece of art. We hope to arrive to the point where we have contact with all the people that really owns one of the instruments of Stradivari or Amati or Guarneri.
The Violin Museum also supports contemporary violin making. This room displays the winning instruments of the International Triennial Competition. The competition was initiated by the Fondazione Stradivari in 1976 and takes place every 3 years. A judging panel, including 5 violin makers and 5 musicians, selects and awards the best modern instruments from those made around the world.
They worked for more than 10 days because they had to have a look to every one instrument, and they have also to listen because, of course, the judgment comprehends sound and technical part of the realization of the instruments. And they have to vote to go together. Difficult work, but so interesting, and really the soul of Cremona. I mean, heritage and future. Those are the goal that we want to reach in our museum.
Traditional Cremona violin making has been included in the UNESCO Intangible Cultural Heritage lists. And the Violin Museum takes a scientific approach to preserve the heritage. The Avedi laboratory of the University of Pavia offers technological support to the museum and helps preserve old instruments.
Questo vuol dire che noi utilizziamo delle tecniche diagnostiche che non toccano l'oggetto, ma che consentono di ottenere informazioni sui materiali presenti. Il protocollo analitico è stato studiato nel corso del tempo, proprio dedicato agli strumenti ad arco. Oggi il laboratorio Arvedi sta facendo una parte di studio molto importante proprio legata anche alla digitalizzazione degli strumenti. Utilizziamo delle tecniche come il 3D scanning laser nell'applicazione proprio degli strumenti, e otteniamo delle copie tridimensionali dei violini. Insieme a questo utilizziamo dei software di gestione delle immagini per arrivare ad avere un modello tridimensionale esattamente identico all'originale. In questo modo i violini non devono più essere tirati fuori dalle teche per essere visionati.
So it's beautiful to look at that, and I think there is a lot in common between the way a violin maker works and the way we researchers work in trying to understand the science behind it. We started thinking with the same, mental position that these artists were using. We realized over time that there are no specific secrets that we can pinpoint in the way they achieve their results. Their true secret is really the expertise that they developed.
The Violin Museum has an auditorium. Every week a young musician is invited to perform here with an instrument from the museum's collection.
Mi piace tantissimo il violino perché ha un suono che, racconta tantissimo, è molto espressivo, ha anche un suono quasi umano e tramite il violino io posso esprimere me stessa. Allora, il violino di Stradivari in confronto agli altri, diciamo che ha un suono molto particolare. È fantastico poter suonare uno strumento con tantissimo vissuto come quelli di Stradivari, appunto.
The melodies produced by this centuries-old instrument celebrate the beauty of violin music and the long-lasting craftsmanship of Cremona violin making. How can the Stradivari violin look and sound so beautiful, even after so many years? One of the secrets is in its material, spruce wood from Paneveggio. Paneveggio is an ancient forest in the Dolomite Mountains. It lies between 1,500 and 1,900 meters above the sea. Many Norway spruces grow here. For 500 years, Italian instrument makers have been using the wood from this forest. This is a forest of music.
Il legno a quei tempi veniva fluidato, veniva portato verso la pianura attraverso i fiumi e sicuramente quando arrivavano le partite di legno provenienti da queste foreste lo sapeva e andava a scegliersi il legno, per cui attualmente gran parte dei loro strumenti, dalle analisi dendrocronologiche, si vede che è legno proveniente da queste zone. La leggerezza di questo legno, un legno con una densità molto bassa e un alto modulo elastico. L'alto modulo elastico fa sì che la combinazione di queste due caratteristiche portano ad avere un legno leggero e che a suo tempo vibra molto, per cui è molto prezzato nella costruzione di questi strumenti musicali. La produzione di questo particolare legno è meno dell'1%, per cui un prodotto d'eccellenza.
It was said that in the 17th century the forest had endured some long and cold years. The trees were growing slowly, so the wood had a higher density. This resulted in the special qualities of the violins made with this wood, and brought the Cremona violin making to a golden age. Today's violin makers still prefer to use spruce wood from here to make instruments.
Sicuramente qua dal 1700 c'è una tradizione nei forestali, in chi gestisce il bosco, nel saper riconoscere, scegliere e lavorare questo particolare legno che gli liutai ancora al giorno d'oggi apprezzano moltissimo.
Many generations of foresters have worked in Paneveggio. An experienced forester can tell immediately if a tree could be used for violin making.
Trees, as you can see, are more than 40 meters tall. 1% of this wood has special properties, and it is used to produce violins and musical instruments, just 1%. It is amazing to think that one day one of these trees, perhaps that one, will become an instrument, a violin, a cello, or a viola. And perhaps it will play, it will play Beethoven or Vivaldi. Let me say that in some way the sound of nature that is in this forest will concentrate in music.
This seems to be an excellent collaboration between man and nature. Nature provides and man creates. With their hands and tools, the violin makers in Cremona have turned the wood into timeless pieces of art. And these are the instruments that bring music to the world.